He planted into dust. Not bad ground, not dead ground. Ground every other farmer in Cedar County was waiting to save. On April 27, 1988, while the whole county was praying for rain, Daniel Mercer pulled a grain drill across 160 acres of dry Iowa alone and dropped soybean seed into soil so powdery it lifted behind the implement like smoke. His neighbor, Frank Doyle, stopped at the fence line and watched long enough to decide Daniel had finally gone too far. In Cedar County, you planted soybeans after a good soaking rain. You planted when the top profile held moisture. You did not plant into a field that had taken 3 windy weeks with no measurable rain. You waited. Everyone waited. Daniel Mercer did not. By October, his dead field yielded 49 bushels an acre. Frank Doyle's carefully delayed field yielded 38. That 11-bushel gap was not luck. It was the result of 6 years of reading, note-taking, field records, and one idea almost nobody around him respected enough to test. In a dry spring, the first rain after planting is often worth more than the rain before planting. And Daniel knew something else. Seed placed early into firm dry soil can sit. It can wait. It can stay intact until a planting rain arrives. But the farmer who waits for that same rain is already behind, because the field has to dry enough to carry equipment. The calendar keeps moving, and the crop loses the one thing an Iowa summer never gives back once it is gone: time. This is the story of what Daniel Mercer understood before anyone else in his county did, and why the work that made him look reckless was invisible to the people watching from the road. Because from the road, it looked insane. From inside the decision, it looked prepared. Daniel had been farming 310 acres since 1972. He was 43 in the spring of 1988. He was not the kind of man people called innovative. They called him careful, slow to talk, slow to change. The kind of farmer who kept folded rainfall records in a kitchen drawer and wrote planting dates in pencil because pencil could be corrected, but ink could not. What nobody in town saw was that starting in 1982, after 2 springs when delayed planting shaved yields harder than summer heat did, Daniel began reading everything he could find on early soybean planting, seed zone moisture, imbibitional chilling, and stand establishment under dry conditions. He read Iowa State. He read Illinois. He read Minnesota. He mailed away for extension circulars and university trial summaries. He copied rainfall tables from county bulletins. He started keeping side-by-side notes on when moisture arrived versus when equipment could actually re-enter fields after a rain. He was not chasing a trick. He was trying to answer a question. If the rain that starts the crop is what matters, why is everyone waiting to plant until after it falls? The answer, according to local habit, was obvious. Because seed in dry dirt dies. Because a planter running in powder makes poor contact. Because rain after planting can crust the surface. Because no sensible farmer risks a whole field on a forecast. But the research Daniel read kept pointing to a narrower truth than the elevator talk allowed. Soybean seed in dry soil is not the same as soybean seed in wet, cold soil. Wet, cold soil can injure seed as it swells. Dry soil, if the seedbed is firm and placement is consistent, often preserves the seed in suspended waiting. Nothing happens fast. Nothing happens yet. But nothing is necessarily lost. And when the rain finally comes, the field that is already planted captures the full window immediately. No scramble. No line at the co-op for seed treatment. No equipment bottleneck. No 2-day delay while the neighbor's field's dry enough to carry a tractor. Just rain. Then emergence. Daniel had spent 6 years building toward that conclusion. He had changed his planter setup in 1985 to improve seed to soil contact in marginal moisture. He had adjusted closing wheels. He had reduced seeding depth variance. He had tiled the lower 40 in 1986, not for this exact year, but because he believed drainage and trafficability were part of the same equation. He had recorded how many days after a 1-inch rain his own fields could carry equipment compared with Frank Doyle's heavier ground half a mile north. He had learned that on his farm, a good rain did not mean go time. It meant waiting again while everyone pretended the season had been rescued. That was the part the county missed. The rain everyone was waiting for did not end the problem. It started a second clock. And Daniel Mercer intended to beat that clock. Let me tell you about the morning he made the call, because the call did not come from bravado. It came from records. The forecast on April 27th showed a 70% chance of steady rain within 48 hours and a larger system behind it. The field was dry down to planting depth, but firm underneath. Daniel walked it before sunrise with a spade, a tape measure, and an old notebook folded into the back pocket of his canvas jacket. He checked moisture at 1 inch. Dry. At 1.5. Still dry. But below that there was cool firmness, not powder all the way down. Enough structure to hold depth. Enough structure to close the slot. He stood there in the wind and looked at a page from 1984. Rain, April 30th. Planting delayed until May 4th due to field conditions. Yield penalty visible by August. Then a page from 1986. Rain, May 2nd. Re-entry, May 5th. Stand acceptable. Canopy late. Yield off. It was not one page. It was a pattern. He went back to the shed. He greased the drill. He started planting. Saw him from the road, and later told the men at the elevator, Dan Mercer is dusting beans in April. One of them laughed. One of them asked, all of them. Frank said, looks like it. And that was enough. By noon, the consensus at the Cedar County Co-op was that Daniel Mercer had mistaken anxiety for strategy. What they did not know was that Daniel had not made one reckless decision. He had made 100 small disciplined ones for 6 years before this field ever saw seed. He had read enough to separate dry risk from cold-wet risk. He had learned his own soils. He had tuned his equipment. He had measured the delay after rain. He had chosen a variety with strong emergence and stable stand performance. He had done the invisible work that makes an unusual decision look irrational to people who only see the last 5 minutes of it. And then the forecast changed. That is where the story becomes something else. Because being informed does not feel like being fearless when the weather turns. The rain Daniel planted ahead of was supposed to arrive by the night of April 28. It did not. The cloud band split south. The county got wind. Then another dry day. Then another. By May 1st, the top inch of soil looked worse than it had on planting day. And now Daniel had 160 acres of seed in the ground and no rain. This is the part where most people imagine a man defending his theory with confidence. That is not what happened. On the morning of May 2nd, before daylight, Daniel went back to the field with a pocket knife and dug in 5 places across the South 80. He opened the seed trench carefully. The seeds were there, intact, swollen only slightly, not rotten, not gone, waiting. He put one in his palm and closed his fist around it. The new forecast showed only scattered chances. Nothing certain. The wind was still there. The field looked worse from the road than it had on the day he planted it. Frank Doyle drove past once that morning, slowed, and kept going. Daniel did not wave. He brought several seeds back to the shop and cut them open under the bench light. Healthy. No mush. No odor. No obvious injury. But there is a distance between what the research says and what your stomach says when your own crop is sitting in dust under a mist forecast. Daniel knew the literature. He knew viable soybean seed in dry soil could hold.
He knew the more dangerous condition was cold water uptake, not delayed water uptake. He knew the stand could still be there if rain came soon. He also knew that if rain did not come soon, 6 years of preparation would not save a seed from simple physics. That was the almost quick moment. Not on planting day. Not at the elevator. In the shop, before sunrise, with split seeds under a yellow light and a forecast that no longer looked trustworthy. His wife, Ellen, came in and asked if the seeds were dead.
Daniel looked at them for a second too long before answering. Then he said, "Not yet." That was the truth. Not confidence. Not peace. Not certainty. Not yet. He did not dig the field up. He did not rework anything. He did not call the extension office, looking for permission to panic. He went back to the notes he had already built. Dry placement date. Expected rainfall. Seed condition on day 5. Air temperature. Wind. Surface loss. He had written enough over 6 years that he could compare this fear to older facts. And the older facts told him the same thing the field was telling him. Wait. Rain arrived late on the night of May 3rd. Not a flood. Not salvation in theatrical form. 0.7 of an inch. Steady and cold enough to settle the dust without sealing the ground. Then another 0.4 2 days later. Daniel's field emerged first. Not because the seed was better. Not because the weather favored him alone. Because when the county's planting rain came, Daniel was already done. While everyone else was checking whether their fields would carry a tractor, his seed was taking water. While they were arguing about whether to start on the lighter knolls or wait one more day, his rows were activating. While Frank Doyle was still counting hours until re-entry on his north slope, Daniel had emergence. That early start changed everything that followed. The stand was uniform. The canopy closed sooner. June weeds never found the same opening. August heat landed on a crop that was farther along instead of still trying to catch up. And when the combines ran in October, the reckless field from the road did 49 bushels. Frank Doyle's delayed planting did 38 on comparable ground. 11 bushels. The same number people remember, because numbers are easier to repeat than reasons. But the reasons matter. The reasons are the whole story. Daniel Mercer had not won because he was bolder than his neighbors. He won because he understood the sequence better. Everyone around him was treating rain as permission to begin. Daniel was treating rain as the trigger the planted seed needed to continue. That difference sounds small until you measure it in days. And in row crops, days become canopy. Canopy becomes stress tolerance, and stress tolerance becomes yield. Let me tell you what happened after 1988, because 1 year is a story, and repeated years are a method. Daniel planted ahead of a forecasted rain again in 1989. Smaller acreage, more selectively. Yield advantage over his delayed acres. 6 bushels. In 1990, a wetter spring made the difference narrower. 3 bushels. In 1991, another dry start followed by a mid-May rain widened the advantage again. 8 bushels. By 1994, he had 7 seasons of records comparing dust in ahead of rain planting, against waiting for post-rain field conditions on his own farm. Not every year was dramatic. Not every field responded the same.
Pattern held strongly enough that it stopped being a hunch and became management. He wrote the results up in a letter to an Iowa State agronomist in the winter of 1995, including field maps, rainfall timing, planting depth, seed condition observations, and yield comparisons. The agronomist wrote back with a careful answer. He did not tell Daniel to recommend the practice broadly. He said the results matched a logic the data had suggested for years. On the right soils, with consistent placement and a credible planting rain forecast, earlier dry soil planting could outperform delayed post-rain planting by capturing calendar time no one could recover later. Frank Doyle read that letter at Daniel's kitchen table. He sat with it a long moment. Then he said, "So you weren't gambling in '88?" Daniel said, "No." Frank said, "Looked like gambling." Daniel nodded once. "That's because you saw the planting," he said. "You didn't see the 6 years before it. That was the real divide. Not courage. Visibility. From the road, planting into dust is the whole event. From inside the operation, it is the final move in a much longer chain." Daniel never turned it into a county sermon. He was too exact for that. He never said everybody should do it. He said heavier ground changes the risk. He said poor seed placement ruins the edge. He said bad forecasts can still beat good planning. He said there are years when waiting is right. He said the method only works when the farmer knows exactly what problem he is trying to solve. That precision is why it kept working. From 1988 through 2006, Daniel Mercer used pre-rain dry soil soybean planting on the lighter and better drained fields of his rotation, whenever the conditions fit his rules. 19 years. Across those years, the acres planted ahead of a credible soaking forecast averaged 46 bushels per acre. Comparable delayed acres on neighboring farms averaged 39. 7 bushels a year on average. On 140 soybean acres, that meant 980 additional bushels in the seasons where the method fit. At an average period price of $6.15 a bushel, that was $6,027 in additional annual revenue attributable to timing and field readiness, rather than to extra land, extra machinery, or some miracle input. Across 19 years, the method was worth $114,513, more than $114,000 from the decision men at the elevator once described as burying seed in dust. And still Daniel never talked about it like he had beaten anybody. He talked about it like he had finally respected time. That may be the deepest part of the story. He was not planting into dry soil because he believed in hope. He was planting because he believed the calendar was the most expensive thing in the field, and the first useful rain should meet seed already waiting for it. His son, Luke Mercer, understood that before the county did. Luke was 11 in 1988.
On the second afternoon of planting, mostly because he liked being in the cab, and because children accept what adults have not yet taught them to doubt. To Luke, planting before rain was not crazy. It was simply what his father had decided after a long time thinking. By the late 1990s, Luke was helping pull records, clean out the drill, and mark rainfall dates in the same notebooks Daniel used. He did not inherit a trick. He inherited a standard. Read, measure, separate habit from cause. Do not confuse what everyone does with what the field actually requires. When Luke took over the operation in 2007, he kept the method. Not blindly. He updated seed treatments. He refined monitor data. He used better forecasts than Daniel ever had. But the principle stayed the same. When the soil profile and the forecast fit the rule, the seed went in before the rain, not after it. In 2018, a younger farmer at the co-op asked Luke if the story about his dad, dusting beans before storms, was true. Luke told him it was. The younger farmer asked the question Frank had asked 30 years earlier. Did it really work? Luke answered, "The records say yes." Then he added the part his father would have added. On our ground, under our rules, with our setup. That is what serious people say when they know the difference between evidence and ego. Because the lesson here is not that conventional wisdom is foolish. Conventional wisdom is often a compressed version of good advice. The lesson is that compressed advice can become blunt. And blunt advice fails exactly where careful observation begins. Wait for rain is decent advice, until waiting costs more than dryness.
Planting into dust is bad advice. Until the dust is firm, the forecast is credible, the field can close properly, and the biggest risk is no longer germination, but lost calendar. Daniel Mercer did not beat the county because he had more nerve. He beat it because he asked a better question for 6 years than most people ask in a lifetime. Not, what do farmers usually do? But, what exactly is the field punishing me for? Once he understood that the field was punishing delay more consistently than it punished dry placement, the whole decision changed shape. From the road, it still looked reckless. At the yield monitor, it looked obvious. And that is how invisible preparation usually works. It hides behind an action simple enough for everybody to misread. The man at the fence sees a grain drill in dust. He does not see 6 winters of extension reports. He does not see the field traffic notes. He does not see the planter adjustments. He does not see the rainfall logs. He does not see the years of asking whether the rain matters most before planting or after. He sees one move. Then he judges the mind behind it. Daniel Mercer lived long enough to watch that judgment change. By the early 2000s, the same elevator that laughed in 1988 had stopped laughing.
He said Daniel had lost his judgment anymore. They said he was particular. They said he knew his ground. They said his timing was strange, but it seemed to work for him. That is how a community quietly admits it was wrong without ever forming the sentence directly. Frank Doyle was more direct. One fall, standing by the scale after harvest, he told Daniel, "I spent a long time thinking that first year was luck." Daniel asked, "What changed your mind?" Frank said, 19 years. Daniel smiled at that, but only a little, because he knew what Frank still half missed. 19 years proved the method. But the method itself had been built before the first year ever happened. That is the line I cannot get past in this story. Prepared is not the same as certain. Prepared means you have earned the right to act before proof arrives. It means when the missed forecast shakes you, you still have something stronger than mood to return to. It means when the county thinks you are improvising, you are actually executing. On the morning of May 2, 1988, Daniel Mercer stood in a workshop with soybean seed in his palm and no rain yet in the sky. He was not certain. He was informed. And there is a difference. The information told him to wait. The rain came. The crop emerged. The reckless field yielded 49 bushels. The careful neighbors, waiting for perfect conditions, came in at 38. The gap was 11 bushels that year, 7 on average over 19 years, and more than $114,000 across the life of the method. But even that is not the whole payoff. The whole payoff is that Daniel Mercer proved something harder than a planting tactic. He proved that what looks like bad judgment from a distance is sometimes just disciplined thinking nobody else bothered to do. The road sees dust, the notebook sees timing. The elevator hears a rumor. The field keeps the real record. And every October after that, the field answered the same way. Everybody else waited for the rain. Daniel made sure the seed was already there when it arrived.